to Trading 101, Trading Psychology Part 2. In this installation, we're going to talk about 10 different cognitive biases that impede your trading and what you can do to prevent them in the future. Awareness of these issues will ultimately lead to preventing them in the future, and you want to do that because otherwise you will find that your trading account is very drained. Cognitive biases and fallacies are mental shortcuts that we often take out of laziness that lead us to directly making mistakes. And some biases actually can lead to a trading style that is profitable, but most are the result of irrational thinking, and they will force you to pay very heavily in the market when you make them. So the first one we want to talk about is the maturity of chances fallacy. This is the belief that if something happens more frequently than it normally does, then it's due to happen less in the future. Or if something happens less frequently than it does currently, then it's more likely to happen in the future. As though these things are somehow ordained by the universe as a thing that needs to be equalized. And this fallacy is really based on a lack of understanding of statistical independence, but it's also wishful thinking. When we place more value on previous events, believing that the universe somehow keeps score for us in our favor, we're more likely to believe that this is going to influence events that take place in the future, but it doesn't. And when the outcome of one event has no impact on the outcome of another event, the events are statistically independent. So believing that these events are connected when they're random or just completely unrelated will lead you to believe that there's importance where there actually is none at all. So this leads us to number 2, over-optimism. And this involves believing that you're less likely to experience some kind of negative outcome as the result of taking a chance compared to other people. And this bias is largely caused by looking at only the desired outcome and not looking at the current situation very much, and pretty much being in a very good mood and believing that you somehow have more information about the situation than other people, and that whatever information you have is more favorable to you and your overall position. So this leads us to number 3, which is overconfidence, which is slightly different than over-optimism. And this basically happens when our subjective assessment of ourselves and our judgment is much greater than an objective assessment reveals it to be. And it often manifests as overconfidence in one's abilities when it's unwarranted, as well as overconfidence in one's abilities relative to other traders or other people, but also in expressing overconfidence in one's trading system or value system when it's completely unwarranted and without merit, when the system has shown absolutely no benefit, that we don't even know if it works. And confidence often exceeds accuracy when people are actually answering questions about an unfamiliar topic. So the less you know, the more confident you are. So people expect that they're correct when the error rate is much higher. So we have number 4, which is the pessimism bias. And this operates the same way as the optimism bias, but instead of regarding yourself as being better off as others, you would actually view yourself as being worse off than others. You might believe you have a harder trading setup than other people, or you might believe you're a less adequate trader than others because you don't win all of your trades. But this is the result of actually exaggerating how often negative things happen to you, and it sort of begins to distort your reality, so that you believe negative things are actually more likely to happen to you all the time compared to other people. So this leads us to number 5, which is analysis paralysis or analysis and choice paralysis. It's when you're so overwhelmed by having so many choices or so much data to analyze that you're unable to actually take action and achieve the outcome you desired. And it never manifests because you decide that the situation is far too complicated to be analyzed. It's too detailed, it requires too many options to proceed. So instead of making a choice based on the available data and changing the details later to secure your desired outcome, basically you're just looking for a perfect solution that doesn't exist, and you should instead be seeking an optimal outcome based on the known information and then proceed. So this leads us into number 6, which is the herding mentality. And this actually takes place in the market quite a bit. So when there's a lack of information in the market and there's a lack of stability and uncertainty, then humans are just more likely to herd together for safety. And this happens in the marketplace, it happens in crowds, it happens everywhere. And reinforcing group actions will overwhelm the individual desires and values in these situations. And people begin to follow the herd, whether they're right or they're wrong, and they move in that direction. And it can become a very powerful force. So in the market, you have to not only be aware of if you're doing it, but also if others are doing it, because you can get swept up in the market and actually get very screwed by people who are doing this, especially if there's a great deal of fear in the market. So this leads us to number 7, which is neglecting probability. And this actually occurs when you completely ignore or disregard probabilities from your decision making. And it's really not a misassessment of the probability. It's just when you completely ignore that a probability for an outcome exists. And basically you want to ignore the risk. So smaller risks are often completely overlooked as being not relevant, or they're completely blown out of proportion and made to be a much larger threat than they otherwise would be. And this happens when there's a great deal of uncertainty surrounding the decision. And actually, this could go along with herding mentality, because certainly groups of people don't adequately assess the risk or look at the risk. Sometimes they just go in one direction and don't even think about what they're doing. And this leads us to number 8, which is choice supportive bias. And this occurs when we give positive attributes to choices that we've already made, simply because we've chosen that option. So we decide that it's better, not because it's objectively better, but because we've just decided it's better because we made that choice. And we begin to downplay the faults of the option that we chose, and we overemphasize the faults of the options that we didn't choose. So oftentimes this would happen if you were trying to choose between a group of stocks, and you might decide that the ones you didn't pick were terrible simply because you picked one for other reasons. I mean, they could all be equal, but this is just, you want to feel better about the choice you did make and bolster your view simply because you want to make sure that you made the right choice. But really, it's the memory of making that decision that becomes more pleasant and distorts your view of how and why the decision was made. So you're being dishonest with yourself. But unfortunately, when we store these biases as memories, it influences our decision making in the future, because our brain can't really tell where these memories arise from. They can't tell that they're sort of false memories. So it's important to adequately weigh our choices and be as honest as possible with ourselves when we finally pick a choice, and not engage in the choice supportive bias. So that leads us to number 9, which is the current moment bias. And this happens all the time in the market. Almost every trader engages in this, and it's usually problematic. It basically happens because we find it difficult to imagine the future and to alter our expectations and behaviors accordingly. So when we're only able to act in accordance with the moment and not look to the past or future to guide our actions, we're engaging in the current moment bias. And this is pretty much every single person that has a trading TV show. The guys, I talk about Jim Cramer, who screams and honks horns and goes crazy. Everything you need to buy now, or never. They act as though the economy is either going up forever and you need to get in now or you'll never make any money, or they're telling you that if you don't sell everything now, you're going to be broke. So this leads us to number 10, and the people who engage in this bias should not be trading or investing in any conceivable way. It is the zero risk bias. So when someone operates with the zero risk bias, they are trying to eliminate all risk, which is never possible despite having other options that actually produce a greater reduction in risk overall with better outcomes. People are willing to pay almost anything, both monetary and personally, to completely eliminate risk, even if the outcome isn't probable of actually eliminating the risk. So basically, you shouldn't be born if you want to engage in the zero risk bias. That is truly the only way to not take any risk. There are no investments in life that are zero risk. There's nothing that we do that is zero risk. So this bias is one that impacts us greatly, both in trading and when we're not trading. So hopefully these 10 cognitive biases have been helpful for both helping you with trading, but also with your personal life as well. And hopefully now that you're aware of them, you can start thinking about them when you start to trade or paper trade and make sure that you're not doing them in the future.